The opinions expressed on this show do not necessarily reflect those of AM 640.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6,
Extreme radio for extreme times. This is A View from Space with the Spaceman. AM 640.
Hi, and welcome to A View from Space. I'm the guy they call Space. I'd like to welcome you in if you're driving around town right now or if you're at work listening to AM 640. I welcome you in. Or if you're checked into channel 865 on Shaw Direct, picking the signal up there, I welcome you in. Or if you're listening to me on your 3 or 4G personal communication device via the Stream the World software, I welcome you in also. Or if you're what some call the best seat in the house, bar none, to check out A View from Space, logged on to 640toronto.com. Picking up the live audio streaming there. I welcome you in. Wherever you are in the world, I welcome you in. Well, the United States government, once the policemen of the world appeared uninformed, confused, confounded, and even powerless this past week, with escalating events in the most volatile region of the world, the Middle East. This comes after having already sent mixed signals to the world as to what should happen with Hosni Mubarak earlier this month. And CIA Chief Leon Panetta took some knocks in the press for predicting Thursday that the Egyptian strongman Hosni Mubarak could step down that day. And as everyone now knows, Mubarak refused to resign that Thursday evening speech. Instead, on day number 17, wouldn't you know it, of the Illuminati-controlled event called Egypt in Crisis, Mubarak delivered a firm 17-minute address that suggested little had changed, saying that he will not bow to foreign pressure. Pretty much said it all for the United States of America, because that's who he meant by foreign pressure. Turns out the United States CIA chief, Leon Panetta, was sort of right. It just took a little longer. Mubarak resigned the next day in a surprise speech on day 18. Now, day 17, I want to go back to that for a moment, simply because I knew something large would happen on the 17th day of this event, because 17, of course, is the date of the death of Osiris, the sun god of Egypt. It was a 17-minute address on the 17th day. And of course, Osiris died on the 17th day of the month of Athir, centuries ago. Now, day 18 is when Mubarak resigned. That's a 9 in numerology, the number of completion. And you knew they would stick by the numbers, especially in Egypt. A senior intelligence official says CIA Chief Leon Panetta was referring to press reports when he told Congress on the Thursday of this week that he'd heard Mubarak might leave by nightfall. I even heard comments in the media saying that the CIA director learned of Mubarak's resignation from the mass media. If you can imagine, the CIA, once the mover and shaker in this world, actually had to go to the mass-controlled media to learn that Mubarak had resigned? Highly doubtful. But one thing is for sure, they got shafted by the Mubarak regime. And that's what this whole exercise was really about. To show the world, the United States government, once the policeman of the world was uninformed, confused, and confounded, and was not in control. Mubarak did hand over power on Thursday, but stunned and disappointed the U.S. when he didn't resign that night. So something happened between that evening's speech when he said he would not bow to foreign pressure and the speech that was made Friday on the 11th. Some high-level meeting had taken place in the time after the Thursday night speech and the next day when Mubarak makes that surprise announcement on national television. So here's what a Kuwaiti newspaper reported on this. Egypt's president, Hosni Mubarak, agrees to step down after a meeting in Cairo with the foreign minister of the United Arab Emirates, Abdullah bin Zayed Al Nahyan. That's a cousin, by the way, of Al Maktoum, the royal family of the United Arab Emirates, who are in turn cousins to the House of Saud, who runs the Arabic world. This is reported in the Kuwaiti newspaper, Al-Kabas. One of the agreements, it's said, in this meeting between Mubarak and the foreign minister of the United Arab Emirates, member of the Al Nahyan family, one of the agreements reached was for the new regime not to go after and bring charges against Mubarak. Also, Mubarak agreed to a formula of withdrawal according to which he would first leave Cairo for Sharm el-Sheikh, and then he would go to the city of Al Ain in the United Arab Emirates. Now, let me just quickly give you a small little thumbnail background on the Al Nahyan family. They are cousins of the Al Maktoum family, who is the reigning royal family in the United Arab Emirates, and are cousins, of course. The Maktoum family are cousins to the House of Saud, the Saudi Arabian royal family, who is the power player in the Arab world. It runs the Arab world because of its money, and it runs Islam also. Now, and takes care of the two most famous Arabic religious spots. Now, the Al Maktoum family is the family that just bought that incredible Atlantis Hotel, the Burj Dubai, Palm Island, and Palm Atlantis. They also have thrown a lot of money at their cousins, because the cousins, the Al Nahyan family, have very little source of income except for the Maktoum family. There are really no exports in the UAE, in Dubai. All they do is spend money there. The tallest structure in the world, Burj Dubai, was built by them. And also, the Maktoums, the Al Nahyans, and the House of Saud are all from the Bani Yas tribe. They're all related. As a matter of fact, the Al Nahyan family has been given rulership of the UAE since the 1800s. You think Mubarak was in Egypt a while. This family has never left the United Arab Emirates. The Maktoum family own Dubai World, which is advised by the N.M. Rothschild Company, a private investment firm and banking firm. That's right, the Rothschilds are advising Dubai World. And one more thing, because I want to make two connections. One with the Illuminati. The Atlantis Hotel will tell you that. And also the other connection is with the British. The Al Nahyan family own the Abu Dhabi United Group, which owns Manchester City of the English Premier League. So now that I've made the British and Illuminati connection, there's more on the meeting that persuaded Hosni Mubarak to leave. That's next on A View from Space on AM 640. I'm Space. I'm just getting started.
Extreme radio for extreme times. This is A View from Space with the Spaceman on AM 640.
I'm the Spaceman. You can email me. I got a couple of addresses. Space at 640toronto.com is one, and spaceman at 640toronto.com is the other. Thanks for the ones I've already received. They start coming in before the show hits the air. So here's the likely scenario that was played out by the unseen forces these last 18 days in Egypt. The real power behind this Egyptian regime change. And those words, regime change, alone should immediately tip you off on who's behind this right away. I mean, after all, who's always affecting regime change around the world under the guise of bringing democracy and freedom to the people? Well, the last place was Afghanistan. The one before that was Iraq. It's the same unseen forces behind all the orange revolutions taking place in various countries in the past few years also. But it's not real democracy. That's just a word. That's just an idea that is transferred with that word to suck people in, to make them think things are going to change and have changed for the better. They're selling more hope. When all that happens is the exact opposite. The Illuminati installed their choice of leader, and things quickly get worse, not better. And the chaos escalates. This is exactly what's going to happen in the most volatile area of the world, the Middle East. As I've been saying for almost a decade now on A View from Space on AM 640 Talk Radio, a new world order is about to be birthed. The American empire is coming to an end. The U.S. is no longer the economic engine of the world, nor the policeman of the world, if you look at the last couple of weeks in Egypt. This job will be done, and is being done, this policeman of the world job, by a global army. It's already here, and it's already working now. It's called the International Strategic Assistance Force, the ISAF. It's made up of soldiers from all Illuminati-controlled nations. This regime change event in Egypt was done to surround Israel with enemies, and in doing so, force Israel to the bargaining table and convince the population to prepare for a two-state solution, to give the Palestinians some land. Mubarak was an ally of Israel. The regime change is being implemented to convince the Israeli citizens who refuse to give up land, not the politicians of Israel, to accept the fact that they now must give up land. So the Illuminati-controlled mass media spin the story this way. The Egyptian people somehow all of a sudden lose their fear of Mubarak's secret police, organize, using social media, Facebook and Twitter, because they're all so rich, you see, and all have computers and cell phones, take to the streets for 18 days. And with the world watching as a witness, the people are then empowered enough to force the police state president of 30 years to quit and leave the country. That's the official story. Power to the people. The people did it by sheer numbers on the street. Here's what's closer to the truth. America must come out of this looking weak and having very little influence, eroding her policeman of the world status. It must look as though the Egyptian people get their way. Democracy, the people rule. But in reality, an ally of Israel in Mubarak will leave power in Egypt, and a tougher adversary will be put in his place. Israel will then be, as I said, surrounded by its enemies and will be forced to a two-state solution. The British MI6 and the Mossad working together leave the American CIA out of the loop as to what's happening. British MI6 do the bidding of the Illuminati, then convey to the Saudi royal family, the House of Saud, the real leaders of the Arabic world and Islam, who in turn is controlled by the British, to go behind the back of the United States CIA, instruct Mubarak to do exactly what he did. This explains the story reported in the Kuwaiti newspaper. Kuwaiti also are cousins of the House of Saud, by the way, that Mubarak agreed to step down after a meeting in Cairo with the foreign minister of the UAE, Abdullah bin Zayed Al Nahyan. As I stated just a few minutes ago, another cousin to King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia. The real drivers in the Arabic world controlled by the British. You can see much more clearly the effect of these unseen forces when you understand the Illuminati control both sides of the conflict, which is how they guarantee the outcome, of course. So, here's what the Illuminati-controlled mass media is saying about America's influence now, post-Hosni Mubarak. After the confusion brought on by Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak's refusal to step down Thursday night, the question of who is in control in Egypt had not become any clearer. As the New York Times and other outlets have reported that Mubarak left Cairo, the uncertainty of the situation left the White House scrambling for options. At 7:52 p.m. Thursday night, it's a 7, by the way, the number of spirituality, Barack Obama issued a statement making it clear the White House expected the resignation. Quote, "We urge the Egyptian government to move swiftly to explain the changes that have been made and to spell out in clear and unambiguous language the step-by-step process that will lead to democracy and the representative government that the Egyptian people seek. The Egyptian people have made it clear that there is no going back to the way things were. Egypt has changed, and its future is in the hands of the people. New York Times. Here's a look at the confusion the White House faced following Mubarak's surprising speech on the Friday. It's Catch-22, writes the Connecting Dots owner. He's a former chairman of the American Society of Magazine Editors. His name's Robert Stein. He wrote, no matter what the Obama White House does, it risks the appearances of doing too little and appearing weak, or too much and being criticized for overthrowing a sovereign government. The coming days will be a test of Barack Obama's skills at walking a tightrope. MSNBC reported the White House is divided into two camps. As the protesters in Tahrir Square demanded revolutionary change from their government, another argument was taking place inside the Obama administration as it struggled with the messages on Egypt. In one camp, some say reports Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, Defense Secretary Robert Gates are turned concerned with keeping the rebels of this region stable and are pushing for a process led by Egypt's Vice President Omar Suleiman. In the other camp, the other side, younger voices from Obama's presidential campaign, including National Security Council staff members Ben Rhodes and Samantha Power, have been arguing that Mubarak's regime is finished and it's time to fully support the protesters. Rhodes, by the way, Ben Rhodes, wrote President Obama's A New Beginning speech. That was the one where he called for democratic reforms in the Arab world. If you recall, that was the speech he delivered on June 4th of 2009, just 4.5 months after being sworn in as the 44th President of the United States, saying he came to seek a new beginning between the United States and Muslims around the world. So, you have the American press reporting that the White House, the United States government, was confused, confounded, and arguing amongst themselves what to do. Hardly a policeman of the world. Space back with more on A View from Space on AM 640.
He goes deeper into today's headlines than anyone else dares to go. But you can take it. This is A View from Space with the Spaceman on AM 640.
I'm the Spaceman. This is A View from Space on AM 640. You can email me at spaceman@640toronto.com or simply space at 640toronto.com. So, now you've heard the United States administration, the U.S. government, once the policeman of the world, was uninformed, confused, confounded, and even powerless and arguing amongst themselves on what to do this past week. Have you ever heard America being portrayed as what you just heard? It's always been the voice of absolute power and confidence. That is until now. Why? Because it's time. It's that simple. What's known as the Great Work by the Illuminati is on the verge of becoming complete. One kingdom, one king. A global government system will replace the American Empire. The work for completion of this plan has been in the works for more than a millennia and will take place after all that can be shaken is shaken. Everything is about to change. And I mean everything. When this celestial round table manifests itself on the earth, as it soon will, with the coming Antichrist, it will be chaired by a Merovingian descent of King Arthur, who was the fabled guardian of the Grail during his particular era of history. A New Age book called The Light Shall Set You Free, recalling King Arthur's old mandate at Glastonbury, Avalon, confirms that England will be the future center for world transformation. It'll be through the Grail in England that the energies of transformation and ascension will be channeled, which eventually will bring the earth into what they call the seventh golden age. The Illuminati's message soon will be, you cannot escape destiny. You cannot escape change. Join the future in unity and look for him to come as well, for he will come. He will show the way, the voice of Albion, an ancient name for Great Britain. Let it be. The king stag, Cernunnos, Satan, will appear as the guardian of the earth, the great bear at his heels. Then will the golden age be on us. Resist, and your world will be destroyed. Here's what's written in the lost books of Merlin. To save the earth from destruction, one is brought back into modern times to recover and teach an ancient magic. The world is then forced to a new world order. The quatrain speaks of an individual being reborn of Arthur to lead the Druidic reconstruction, the new world order, a global government, the new global system on the way. Globalism is your hint. That's what they're calling it now. He is the one on whose head success or failure seems to lie. He also appears to be the same one who is charged with joining the three lost books in one, in accord with a much older prophecy. In Celtic mythology, you see, Avalon is a paradise island, which is traced back to today's official logo of the Sisterhood of Avalon. It's the same as it was in the ancient past, created for this occult group a millennia ago by none other than their sister Gwyd, short for Gwydion, which, when traced back to ancient Celtic, Gwydion means wild. This design is the main identifying image of the Sisters of Avalon. The central image is a Celtic triskelion, moving in a counterclockwise motion as a reflection of the energies of the divine feminine. The arms of the triskelion are made up of stylized nines or upside-down sixes in honor of the ancient ninefold Sisterhood of Avalon. And when this nine is tripled, it reflects the cycle of the moon. The moon, of course, completes all of its phases every 28 days. At the center of the triskelion is another shape that is infamously dated back to the Garden of Eden. The mystical fruit yielded from the silver branch, which the Illuminati believe calls them to the journey across the waters. The silver apple represents the otherworldly island of Avalon and the lunar mysteries kept by her priestesses. I'm talking about witchcraft coming back again, and the divine feminine as personified by none other than Mary Magdalene, who is said to have married Jesus Christ, had children, and that bloodline lineage today is about ready to take over their right place at the top of the pyramid to rule the world. Yes, the apple. This is the very name chosen as the name of that powerful tech company. The apple mystery is revealed by the Sisters of Avalon sect, since it's a women's order. The apple plays an important symbolic role in all of this. You see, when the apple is split in half, the seeds and the core form a natural pentagram or five-pointed star, which is the symbol for goddess worship, representing woman. The five-pointed pattern inside the halved apple is the symbol of Avalon. There's also more to that. The 5 seeds of wisdom are the very core of the Avalonian tradition. The horizontally cut apple, when you cut an apple in half, it reveals the mystery of the 5-fold cycle, which is wisdom at the heart of the self. This 5-fold energy is reflected in the pantheon of goddesses of Avalonian and is the essence of the Avalonian cycle of healing. The goddesses of Avalon are the heart and soul of the sacred landscape of the earth. Each of these 5 goddesses supposedly weave a transformational energy into the matrix of the archetypical realm. Once a person has successfully made contact with the landscape areas and established a good working relationship with each of these places of power, it's said that you can use them to come into connect with these ladies of Avalon. These 5 divine ancestresses will act as your guide and supposedly help you and your quest for a positive change, personal sovereignty, and the wisdom that comes from drinking deep from the cauldron of your own soul. Witchcraft. Believing that you yourself are a god. This is clearly nothing more than a return to ancient goddess worship. And returning we are. This exact same concept is being cleverly hidden within what you know as the Green Movement, for instance. That the earth is a living, breathing female spirit named Gaia, and is now quite perturbed with man because we're not treating her well. The 5 goddesses of Avalon are Blodued, Blood-Iwith. She's the lady of initiation. She starts you off. She asks the initiate to take off the garments of expectation and to peer into the darkness of the self, to find and ultimately live your inner truth. What they will tell you is that you are a god. She teaches you to fly where others would see you grounded. Avalon Witch number 2, Rhiannon. She's the lady of manifestation. She tells the person to stand strong no matter what the challenges to our truth are. She teaches to ask for what you need and grants abundant and loving support to carry the initiate through their dark times. Did you hear what I said when she's instructing you to stand strong no matter what the challenge to our truth? Each person supposedly has their own truth. Now we're into a realm where there are many truths. Then we go even a little deeper and we find that do what thou wilt be the whole of the law. Aleister Crowley. There is no good or bad. Only thinking makes it so. If it's not good for you, it may be for another, so don't speak against it. That's the new coming religion. Space, back with more in a moment on A View from Space on AM 640.
Deprogramming the brainwashed simply by uncovering the truth. He's the Spaceman with A View from Space on AM 640.
I'm the Spaceman. You can email me at space@640toronto.com or spaceman@640toronto.com. The pentagram, 5-pointed star, which is actually the symbol in witchcraft for goddess worship. There are, and it just so happens, is it a coincidence, that there are 5 witches of Avalon. Blodaiwith, the Lady of Initiation, which I've already mentioned. Number 2 is Rhiannon, the Lady of Manifestation. As I said, she is the one who tells you to stand strong no matter what the challenges are to your personal truth. She teaches you to ask for what you need, grants abundant and loving support to carry the initiate through the dark times. Rhiannon, of course, is already familiar to you through pop culture brainwashing. Rhiannon, of course, is the name of the hit song written and recorded in the early 70s by Stevie Nicks, formerly of Fleetwood Mac, who has, I believe, been channeling this Avalon goddess of witchcraft her whole career. Stevie Nicks released the album in 1983 called The Wild Heart. Remember, Gwyd means wild in the Celtic language. The Wild Heart album went double platinum. Guess what number it reached on the Billboard chart? What's the shape inside of an apple again? A pentagram? A 5-pointed star? How many goddesses of Avalon are there? 5. Yes, of course, the Wild Heart album reached number 5 on the Billboard album chart in 1983. Check it yourself. Now this Celtic goddess is living again in another human being, because Stevie Nicks has gone by. It's time for Rhiannon. Rhiannon is sold through Rihanna to the next generation, an English R&B singer. Her real name is Robin Hannah Louise Kenny of Leeds in West Yorkshire, England. That's Rhiannon, which number 2 of the 5 of Avalon. Number 3 is Ceridwen. She's the Lady of Transformation. She beckons you to enter your own darkness, to seek out the seeds of your own wholeness. She instructs that the only path to wisdom is through trial and experience. In other words, if it feels good, do it. And if it felt good, do it again. In her cauldron, the mysteries of death and rebirth are revealed, and you emerge to begin the whole process once more. You then supposedly ride the wheel of life with your newfound insight and understanding, so that you can illuminate the next phase of your journey with what you've learned. Which number 4 from the 5 Avalon goddesses is Arianrhod. She's the great teacher, holding the energy of the active principle. She's the embodiment of the wheel of life, reincarnation. Yet, herself not being subject to it, she's the force of bound and rebound, the karmic lesson bringer that supposedly brings the universe into balance. It's said that all cycles and time are written within her realm of influence. Arianrhod is the source of Awen, the divine spark of inspiration, although it is through Ceridwen that Awen is bestowed. Awen is Welsh for the word inspiration, so you get inspiration from the Celtic goddess or witch Cerridwen. And the last, number 5, goddess of Avalon is Bronwyn. She is the embodiment of sovereignty and is the guardian of Avalon, holding the energy of the passive principle. She is the whole, the center, the primal feminine energy. All things emanate from Bronwyn. She's the goddess of the land, as well as the spirit of the land. In Avalon, Bronwyn was always consulted in matters dealing with her realm, that is, concerning the full tapestry of Avalon, rather than the individual stitches. She's the goddess of the grand scheme of things, the broader perspective that allows the great patterns to be revealed. In Welsh mythology, Bronwyn was the beautiful daughter of Lear and the sister of the British king Bran. She later became the wife of the Irish king Malfawich, and her story is told in the second branch of the Mabinogi. Stevie Nicks wrote Rhiannon after seeing the name in the novel Triad by Mary Leader. Mabinogi. She said that she was completely unaware at the time of the Mabinogi legend of Rhiannon, but I beg to differ. I just stated that Bronwyn was always consulted in matters of dealing with her realm that had the full tapestry of Avalon, rather than the individual stitches. Being the witch of the bigger picture, in the grander scheme of things, you know the song Season of the Witch, right? It was recorded by many bands and was written by Donovan Leitch of 60s fame. A line in the song goes, "You've got to pick up every stitch." In witchcraft, this means when practicing witchcraft, you have to follow the guiding spirit's directions precisely, or the spell you're trying to cast will not work. Donovan Leitch, by the way, the writer of the song, who also wrote Atlantis and another of his hits, Sunshine Superman. Remember, he teaches you one thing. We're dealing with sun worshippers here. Glastonbury and Stonehenge in Britain are Celtic and Druidic pagan centers. There's a quote from the book All Roads Lead to Rome by Michael de Semlin. It shows how the organized Christian churches are slowly but surely merging with the ancient belief system of the Celts and the Druids. Inter-church and interfaith pilgrimages are organized in increasing numbers as devotees search for their pre-Reformation roots. The New Age movement is not left out either, and Glastonbury, which is the center of occult and pagan activity, attracts possibly the largest numbers of pilgrims. The 1988 ecumenical celebration mass for the millennium of the death of Anglican St. Dunstan in Glastonbury, attracted a gathering of some 14,000 Christians led by the Archbishop of Canterbury himself. This shows there's a huge concentrated attempt being made by the Illuminati through the New Age movement to merge Christianity and the Celtic religions together. The books, which go by the title Pendragon, are now stocked in Christian bookstores along with other Celtic material and music. I tell you, watch out for King Arthur, Merlin, Camelot, the Knights of the Round Table to show up in these so-called Christian bookstores soon, too. These Celtic legends are going to be used to introduce unwary Christians to witchcraft. Celtic Christianity actually already has its own website. That's Celtic Christianity. This Antichrist religious system is intended to be the replacement, you see, for the three monotheistical religions: Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. That must go. Back in the late 60s, Marshall McLuhan made an interesting observation about the persons who control the media. He said he was given that, if he was given that power, he would control all of society. And his recent biographer says McLuhan knew about the secret societies who own or control the very media and society that we live in. It's a multi-layered management that many popes, even kings, and all university professors have mistakenly thought that they were in charge of, but later were seen to be operating according to an even bigger plan. The Bilderberg's Trilateral Commission aren't the most powerful or at the top of the mountain, but whoever organizes their seminars and information are very important. Whenever powerful people seek to come to common ground, it's perceived by the media, which they control, then likewise perceived by the masses, that it's a good thing for us all when they meet and decide our future. Space, back with more in a moment. It's a View from Space on AM 640 Talk Radio.
The ancient mystery religions, numerology, the Holy Grail decoded, and he goes deeper than a black hole into today's headlines. This is A View from Space with the Spaceman on AM 640.
If you'd like to email me, you can. I've got two addresses, spaceman@640toronto.com's one, or just simply space@640toronto.com, and thanks for the ones I've already received. Before the break, I was talking about Marshall McLuhan, who once said, the person who controls the media, if this power was given to him, Marshall McLuhan, he could actually control all facets of society. Because the medium of the media is so powerful to convey thought. For instance, he said whenever powerful people hold meetings and try to find some common ground, it's perceived by the media first, then translated to the masses, and they believe it, that it's a good thing for us all. When, and in fact, it's exactly the opposite. This is, in fact, where the movers and shakers are told they're part of the secret plan for stripping people of their personal freedoms and their countries of their sovereignty to make way for a new global system. The Bilderberger meetings, the trilateral meetings, the financial meetings in Switzerland, the G20s, the G8s, all those meetings are designed, in fact, to strip us of our personal freedoms and our countries of our sovereignty, because that's what happens every single time they meet. When the meetings are over, these high-placed pawns then return to their positions to implement the next part of the plan. We're never told what takes place behind these closed-door meetings, so in the absence of facts, we have to look at history or the outcome of the supposed plans that these people agree to implement. And it's always the same. It's for their greater good, and the average person loses every single time. Shortly after the Trojan World War in 1200 BC, a similar and probably similarly structured meeting by the ancestors of today's Illuminati took place off Miletus. Miletus was an ancient Ionian city located in western Asia Minor in what's today present-day Turkey. It was occupied by Greeks back then. These ancient ancestors of the Illuminati in control today were called the Perpetual Sailors in those days, and as members of the Phoenician Brotherhood had been around since Baalbek and before the pyramids. Those who run the bureaucracy or act as political stooges or fronts for these plans include the likes of Napoleon Bonaparte, Adolf Hitler. But the history we're told about never explains how these supposed dictators were put into power, where they got their commodities and money to buy them from, or very importantly, how they were managed or how the leaders themselves were handled. For instance, Hitler, it's said, was a Jew and lived as one in Vienna, according to the report made for the highest in command of the United States intelligence, a man known as Wild Bill Donovan, the man responsible for creating the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, which eventually evolved into the CIA, or the Central Intelligence Agency. History books leave out all that evidence of any spiritual or occult practices used by Hitler and his handlers. I know positively that one professor, Horbiger, Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS, Dietrich Eckart, Adolf Hitler's handler, had definite connections to the Tula Society. Those and many others were adept in matters of the occult, too. There's a book called The Mind of Adolf Hitler, the secret wartime report, and it makes very apparent Hitler was a bastard child of the Rothschilds. The story goes, Hitler's grandmother was a servant girl with Lionel Nathan Rothschild and his family in Vienna, who was later dismissed and sent back to the country where she came from because she was pregnant with a child by the Rothschilds. Now, her child was supposed to have been Hitler's father. An investigation was ordered by Austrian Chancellor Engelbert Dollfuss, and this fact was proven by the investigation. Dollfuss was assassinated later, allegedly because of the findings in this investigation. The father of biblical archaeology, W.F. Albright, states that the Bible is taken from the ancient Phoenician beliefs, then tweaked. The Aryan race is known to have their spiritual center located at Tara in Ireland for at least a millennia. These are the builders of the pyramid whom Moses led out of Egypt, as the Bible states. Genetics is a record that the empire builders couldn't fully eradicate either. They did an excellent job ridding the world of knowledge in books and libraries like the one that was in Alexandria and burnt down, Bangor, and the Mayan lands. Genetics now that all white men, including many North American Indians like the Sioux, started out near the Caucasus Mountains 30 to 35,000 years ago. Linguistics and other archaeological tools, like as forensic analysis of corpses hooked on cocaine from Peru and in Egypt, has made the official history of empire and man far from believable. It was the ancient sun worshippers working through the Grecian Empire who honored the ancient ones they called the Keltoi. Then it was the enslaving barbarians of Rome who enjoyed their sport in the arenas, who really refined this faked history of man and empire. They had the audacity to call the Berbers barbarians even before they ripped off their own people by creating Caesar, and later as they made churchianity the true Roman Empire. Our sovereign nations are founded on concepts of manifest destiny, while they give their cronies manifest subsidy. And it was this kind of perversion that allowed the British to colonize India, force opium on China to take them over. The Treaty of Tordesillas, dictated by Pope Alexander VI was the significant starting point of a plan to expand the Roman Catholic Church Inquisition. This Pope Alexander VI, was a Borgia and related to the de Medicis, who were then in charge of the financial structure of the known world and held a monopoly in it. It's exactly the same today. No different. There's nothing new under the sun. It's only history repeating itself. Could the de Medicis have passed their monopoly on to the Rothschilds? The answer is yes. All you have to do is to have a look at the place Mayer Amstel Rothschild lived and worked as the chief financial guru. You'll find it was the Hesse family castle. This is the same exact place where a de Medici favorite son by the name of Saint Germain spent a lot of time. At the time of the founding of the Jesuits, you'll find the Borgias set up their first university, which of course implemented full-scale teaching of St. Thomas Aquinas. The de Medici matron, Catherine, was the protector of another Jesuit named Nostradamus. The Alumbrados were the secret society within the Jesuit order, and they may even have founded it in the style of the Priory of Sion, founding the Templars and the Knights of Malta 5 centuries before. And it follows, too, that Nostradamus was a member of this esoteric inner sanctum. Nostradamus, Aquinas, and Saint Germain are 3 of the most knowledgeable alchemists history has ever known. You'll find, too, that the origin of alchemy comes from and was akin to Druidism. But you won't find this in our history books. Space, back with more in just a moment on A View from Space on AM 640 Talk Radio.
He goes deeper into today's headlines than anyone else dares to go. But you can take it. This is A View from Space with the Spaceman on AM 640.
I'm the Spaceman. This is A View from Space on AM 640 Talk Radio. You can email me at spaceman@640toronto.com, or the other address is space@640toronto.com. Thanks for the ones you sent. Let me just call him G.O. I was talking about Marshall McLuhan not long ago, the medium is the message guy, who said if he owned the media, he could control all of society. He sends me this quote: "Those conspiracies that are too incredible to be believed are by the same right these which most often succeed." Quote by Marshall McLuhan. Sort of like along the lines of Hitler when he said, "The bigger the lie, the more people will believe." It's just the way human nature is. I was also touching on the de Medici family. The de Medici family, if you're not up to speed on this ancient, powerful family, it furnished the world with a few kings, a few queens, and a few popes. All came from that very family. It's no different today. There's nothing new. It's the same families, bloodlines that have been running it all along. And the conspiracy that's too incredible to be believed is that Little Britain can actually end up, or someone that's living there now that's an extraction of a German family, could actually rule the entire world. A one global system under one man. It's coming, and it's coming soon. I know, a conspiracy that is too incredible to be believed. Now, the de Medici matron Catherine, she was the protector of another Jesuit named Nostradamus I talked about. He, Aquinas, and Saint Germain, three of the most knowledgeable alchemists of all time. And the origin of alchemy I was touching on before the break is just like Druidism. When the Pope apologized for 2 millennia of heinous acts in 1999 while asking for the forgiveness and renewal, he didn't mention the Thomists are still a major force in this order. You and I have not been allowed to know the facts, and we've all been kept in the dark, far past the Dark Ages, created by these people who keep knowledge, power, to themselves. The Church has gone one step farther, done worse. Yes, much worse things. For instance, to women. Ever since Hammurabi decreed a woman is the property of her father until she is sold to her husband. Theocracy has been a tool, believe it or not, of noble or monarchist families, and philosophy has been controlled by these theocracies from the time of Plato right up to today. There are many secrets and intrigues of old that have simply been modernized. Here's an example of what I mean. Nostradamus, for example, was a member of an ancient and secret inner sanctum called the Sons of the Widow, according to the book The Secrets of Nostradamus by David Oveson. He also says he was an initiate of the Hibernian mysteries and an expert in the green languages that are taken from the language of the trees. I know this language relates to the bards, whose troubadours of Cathar times. He was born among their recent remains caused by the crusades of the Dominican Hounds of God. The author Oveson has a good handle on the Irish part of the equation and the bardic tradition. He says the sons were the followers of the biblical Miriam, who he shows as the Masonic Hiram through these cryptic or coded languages. I think there was an earlier widow that Manetho places at the very beginning of the genetic foundation of white people 35,000 years ago. This is when Manetho says Isis founded the Egyptian colony. Manetho was the Egyptian high priest of Heliopolis and was a prostituter of ideas for Ptolemy in history, which in turn played an important part in the Bible writing. The bardic verbal tradition is like Hebrew mysticism, which many Hollywood stars are following now. It's known as the Kabbalah. Those precepts are also in the Tao and the shamanic systems throughout the world. Scientific American and National Geographic even espouses that North America was visited from 30,000 years ago by Europeans. In the book called The Secrets of Nostradamus, it's stated that there is even some indication that the mystery schools of Imperial Rome had ordained that Ireland should remain untouched as an unintended by the initiation schools. It was on the edge of the map of the Roman Empire, and it was intended by the initiation schools who go back to a reorganization of Thutmose' world in Egypt and before, that this map could correspond to the future Christian world. That, in fact, it had been part of the destiny of Rome to establish the ground for the development of the Ireland, to develop it for the spiritual mysteries of the future, which we know now, which was to be the new initiation schools of Christianity. So St. Columba said, Christ is the new Druid. Although the Roman army did reach Ireland, They didn't take over its cultural life or destroy its druidic priestcraft in the way they seem to have destroyed it in England, Scotland, and even less in Wales. So something of great pre-Christian mystery wisdom survived in Ireland and Wales, and it was the reason it continued as the main esoteric center of European cultural life. This is why Ireland became a refuge for Masonic Christianity through languages like Uncial. They created many Bible myths or precepts, and the language they developed became English for what you could call pre-Roman Christianity. What we now tend to see romantically through the eyes of later poets as the ending of the Celts was really the dawn of esoteric Christianity. Druidism creeping into Christianity, which is yet to play out in the future of Europe, because, you see, Hitler had already tried to bring this belief system to Europe through the Thule Society. He even called himself the torchbearer of Jesus. Ancient Druidic wisdom has already begun to mix with the Christian mysteries, to those mysteries which we now call Celtic Christianity. And the Rosicrucians of the Masonic lodges have maintained a lot of the ritual and knowledge, even if most of them are not able to decode the rituals, symbols, and words they speak. It may surprise some people to see German historian Besoldus claiming that the name Huns came from a Celtic word meaning great magicians. Surely this is what the Druids and the Smiths were able to do. They were even able to create spiritual visions of such force that whole armies would shudder and quake and then run from the field of battle. Glastonbury, the home of the first Christian church. I'll get a quick little quiz for you. Are you ready? Where did the Christian church begin after Jerusalem? I'm waiting for your answer. The answer is England. Locate the first Christian church built above ground. Answer, once again, England. What country first nationalized Christianity? England again. Are you guessing correct now, or did you know? You see where I'm going with this. To whom was the book of Romans written? The answer is the royal family of England. Who founded the Christian Church of England? The answer, Joseph of Arimathea, Jesus' uncle. Surprised? This is all well-documented history. History that very few of us have ever heard of. But why? For the same reason that many were never taught about the massacres of the original North American Indian nations that inhabited this area before the Europeans sailed over and claimed it for their king. The Illuminati write history to suit themselves. You'll see this again and again and again if you research the history of the English Church. We're victims of the Greco-Roman version of history. The Illuminati want you to believe that they were the most important ones on the stage of history and called everyone else barbarians. Well, it's all a lie. They're writing history again this past week with Egypt and Hosni Mubarak. Do you believe the official version that the people themselves affected regime change? That's what's going to be written in the official version of history. Here's a quote taken from Lionel Smith Lewis's book entitled St. Joseph of Arimathea at Glastonbury. I quote, "It is certain that Britain received the faith in the first age from the first sowers of the word. Of all the churches whose origin I have investigated in Britain, the Church of Glastonbury is the most ancient." Written by Sir Henry Spelman in his Concilia. He also stated, "We have abundant evidence that this Britain of ours received the faith, and that from the disciple of Christ himself, soon after the crucifixion of Christ." Robert Parsons, the Jesuit, in his 3 conversions of England, admits that the Christian religion began in Britain with 50 years of Christ's ascension. Spaceman back with more in a moment on the fake history. On A View from Space on AM 640 Talk Radio.
The ancient mystery religions, numerology, the Holy Grail decoded, and he goes deeper than a black hole into today's headlines. This is A View from Space with the Spaceman on AM 640.
The Spaceman, AM 640, and A View from Space. You can email me at spaceman@640toronto.com or space@640toronto.com. Either way, I'll get them. LL just was saying in the body of his email that he enjoyed the show, but that's all he said. But he sent me a whole bunch of JPEGs, some great pics, and my favorite, I think, is the one where the toilet paper roll is actually American $1 bills, which kind of looks cool. They should actually market that. It's like toilet paper that looks just like the American dollar. I think it'd be a big seller. So I was talking about the Jesuits before the break. Robert Parsons and his 3 conversions of England, admitting that Christian religion began in Britain within 50 years of Christ's ascension. And another Jesuit named Alfred, in his Regia Fides, says it's perfectly certain that before St. Paul had come to Rome, Aristobulus was absent in Britain. He goes as far as to say, if credit be given to the ancient authors, this church without competition was senior to all Christian churches in the world. Polydore Virgil wrote, Britain, partly through Joseph of Arimathea, partly through Fagatus and Damianus, was of all kingdoms the first that received the gospel. It's a matter of distinct interest that at the beginning of Queen Mary I of England's reign, who ruled, by the way, from 1516 till 1558, Britain was the first country to be converted to Christianity. Queen Mary I was the eldest daughter of Henry VIII, by the way, and only surviving child of Catherine of Aragon. As the 4th crowned monarch of the Tudor dynasty, she is remembered for restoring England to Roman Catholicism after succeeding her short-lived Protestant half-brother Edward VI in the process. She had almost 300 religious dissenters, Protestants, burned at the stake in the Marian persecutions, earning her the nickname Bloody Mary. She was the one to reestablish Roman Catholicism, and then it was reversed by her successor and her half-sister, Elizabeth I, who had John Dee, the occultist, as her closest advisor. The Venerable Bede, who was Benedictine monk, priest, and historian, writing about 740 AD, says, the Brits preserved the faith which they had received under King Lucius, uncorrupted, and continued in peace and tranquility until the time of the Emperor Diocletian. The Benedictine order was where this latest pope, by the way, Pope Benedict XVI, takes his name. Notice that these two historically important events that I've just mentioned, number one, the foundation of the Church of England by the disciples of Christ, and number two, the acceptance of Christianity by the British nation under King Lucius at about 170 AD, suggests one thing: that Britain was the first of all nations to accept Christianity as its national religion. Very few people realize that this is why the British monarchy is called our most religious monarchy. Not many realize that the superior dignity and antiquity of the national church has been decided by church councils either. The councils of Pisa in 1409, Constance in 1417, Siena in 1424, and Basel in 1434. It was contended in those church councils that the churches of France and Spain have to give up in some points of antiquity and precedence to that of Britain, since the British Church was founded by Joseph of Arimathea immediately after the Passion of Christ. Now, if Britain has the hammer hand on these councils, these were the councils that actually decided what went into the Bible. So the British monarchy had a lot to say about how the Bible was constructed. Gildas the Wise, the earliest Christian historian, 1425 to 512 AD, points out that the light of Christ shone there in the last year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, which would be in 37 AD. This falls in line with the fact that this gave precedence to British bishops at the church councils on the grounds that Britain was converted immediately after the crucifixion of Jesus Christ in Jerusalem. Now I want to bring up a book called The Drama of the Lost Disciples by George Jowett for some background on the journey and makeup of the party headed up by Joseph of Arimathea to Britain. In the book, The Drama of the Lost Disciples, George Jowett contends that the only man who the Sadducees dared not oppose in Jerusalem was Joseph of Arimathea, the uncle of Jesus, known scripturally and in secular history as called him Joseph of Arimathea. He was supposedly the protector of that little band of disciples during the perilous years following the time after the crucifixion of Jesus, a very dangerous time after he was nailed to the cross for anyone that believed in Christianity. Joseph of Arimathea, the uncle of Jesus, being the head of the Christian underground in Judea, sails then to Britain with a small contingent of family and friends, and with Christ's only earthly treasure. Are you ready? His mother, the Virgin Mary. Joseph of Arimathea was a man of refinement, history will tell you, well-educated, rich, and one who possessed many talents. He had extraordinary political and business ability and was reputed to be one of the wealthiest men in the world of that time. He was the Dale Carnegie of his day, a metal magnate controlling the tin and the lead industry, which was the equivalent of the steel industry today. He's even said to have owned one of the largest private merchant shipping fleets afloat, which sailed the world's seas in the shipping lanes transporting this precious metal, tin. In St. Jerome's translation, Joseph's official title is given as Nobilis Decurio. This would indicate that he held a prominent position in the Roman administration as a minister of mines. According to the Talmud, Joseph was the younger brother of the father of the Virgin Mary. He was her uncle, and therefore a great-uncle to Jesus. Mostly from the secular reports, we learn that Joseph was a married man, and his son, Josephus, left a mark of distinction in British history. It's quite obvious that the husband of Mary died while Jesus was young. Under Jewish law, such a circumstance automatically appointed the next male kin of the husband, in this case Joseph, as legal guardian of the family. We know that Joseph never forsook his nephew. He stood by him as a bold, fearless defender in history, we're told, at the notorious trial, and defied the Sanhedrin by going to Pilate and boldly claiming the body when all others feared to do it. It's commonly taught, too, that Jesus was poor and came from obscure relatives. His relationship with the affluent Joseph of Arimathea proves otherwise. In his own right, he was a property owner, but long before he took up his mission, he gave up all material wealth. In a book called Did Our Lord Visit Britain by Charles Dobson, he writes of some historical background of both the tin trade in England and Jesus' relationship with Joseph of Arimathea. He wrote this, that such a trade, the tin trade, existed is too well attested to need proof. Herodotus, as early as 445 BC, speaks of the British Isles as the Tin Islands, or, as he called it, the Cassideres Pythias, mentioning the tin trade, as does Polyblus. Diodorus Siculus gives a detailed description of the trade also. He tells us that the tin was mined, beaten into squares, carried to an island called Ictus, joined to the mainland at low tide, which is generally held to be Mount St. Michael in Cornwall today, although some have identified it with Falmouth. So it was shipped from Morlaix and transported across France on pack horses to Marseille. From Marseille it was then again shipped to Phoenicia, and there were many ancient workings in Cornwall still attesting to this tin trade. It's even still mined there today. Lord Avebury and Sir John Evans held the opinion that the tin trade existed as early as 1500 BC, and Sir Edward Creasy, in his History of England, writes the British mines mainly supplied the glorious adornment of Solomon's temple. Joseph of Arimathea was an uncle of the Virgin Mary, being the younger brother of her father. He gained his wealth as an importer in the tin trade, which existed between Cornwall and Phoenicia. On one of his voyages, he supposedly even took Jesus Christ as a boy with him. Jesus either remained in Britain to be taught the Druidic tradition, or returned later as a young man to continue his Druidic studies, and stayed there in quiet retirement in Glastonbury. He erected for himself a small house of mud and wattle. Later, Joseph of Arimathea, fleeing from Palestine, settles in the same place and erects a mud and wattle church there. Spaceman, back with more in a moment on AM 640 and A View from Space on Talk Radio.
deeper into today's headlines than anyone else dares to go. But you can take it. This is A View from Space with the Spaceman on AM 640.
The guy they call Space. This is A View from Space on AM 640. That's all it is. You can email me at spaceman@640toronto.com or space at 640toronto.com. Now, you can see a concerted effort of the history being faked, rejigged, things added. Things aren't really described the real way they went down. An example is this past week in Egypt, how regime change was put into effect. Hardly the voice of the people, but that is what it's going to be written in history as. And Twitter and Facebook, if you can believe that, are actually going to be two of the main weapons used. It's unbelievable how they're trying to sell democracy, this virtual democracy of theirs around the world. It's the same way with ancient history, as I strive to prove weekly here on A View from Space on Talk Radio, AM 640. And now, with this new occult religion, this Masonic Christianity that is being, melding together Druidic principles and Christianity together, you can see how they're trying to connect Jesus Christ with England, with Glastonbury in particular, and to King Arthur. What I'm quoting tonight are some of the Illuminati-controlled authors of books that have been spinning these yarns because for a minute they're hardly believable. But if they're constantly taught in schools, if they're in our movies, if they're in the latest best-selling books, novels, soon it will be accepted as truth. This is how it's done. So we're told that Joseph of Arimathea actually brought Jesus as a young boy to Glastonbury, learned from a university of Druids. They started a church. Fleeing from Palestine, Joseph of Arimathea erects a mud and wattle church at Glastonbury, which just happens to be the very first church of all Christianity in England. The inscription there reads, Jesus, Maria. Tradition holds that Joseph's mud and wattle church was replaced with the Lady Chapel as we know it today at Glastonbury. The only writing to survive the abbey's destruction, the little church's destruction, is located in the wall of Lady Chapel. It seemed to give silent testimony to the presence of Glastonbury, at Glastonbury, of the Mother of Jesus, Mary. The operative word here, of course, is seems to give silent testimony to the presence at Glastonbury in the Mother of our Lord. You see, Here's the deception, the proof that Jesus is connected to Druidism, therefore King Arthur, therefore the royal family's lineages of this very holiest of bloodlines. The link is made. How? By an inscription on a rock at Glastonbury on the wall of an old church called the Lady Chapel, named that way because of Mary, the Virgin Mary, who supposedly came there with Joseph of Arimathea. See, there's many questions are unanswered concerning the time when Jesus was found by his mother at the temple, talking to the rabbis there. If you know your Bible, they were wondering where he was, and they found him in the temple, the Jewish temple, talking to the rabbis. So, how did Joseph and Mary come to start off home without assuring themselves that he was, in the group that was traveling? How came he to allow them to start without informing them that he was somewhere else? Where was Jesus staying during this visit? If he was with them until the day of departure, where was he staying during the other 3 days that intervened before they found him, when he was supposedly at the temple for 3 days talking to the rabbis? Where did he stay? Who was giving him food and shelter? Before tracing out the details of the story based on these suggestions, you got to first consider the locality of Arimathea. Leading authorities identify this place with Ramah, or Ramallah, as it's called today. It was the birthplace of the prophet Samuel, and is called the Septuagint Arathaim. Joseph calls it Amartha. The identity seems clear. Now, Ramah, or Ramallah, lay about 8 miles due north of Jerusalem on the Jerusalem-Nazareth road. It was the first stopping place of caravans traveling north from Jerusalem. It would be the stopping place of the Holy Family, too, for both to and from the city of Jerusalem. Joseph is always spoken of as belonging to Arimathea, which implies that it was his existing place of residence. He was a wealthy man, and his duties as a counselor would often bring him to Jerusalem, where he had also a house in town. He would certainly be in Jerusalem at the time of the feast or the Passover, so the whole story now becomes pretty clear. As the uncle of the Virgin Mary, you probably knew all about the story of Jesus' birth. Year by year, when Joseph and Mary attended the feast, he would inquire about the mysterious child. He would eagerly look forward to his first visit with him. The Holy Family would arrive at Ramallah on their journey down. They would spend the last night of the journey there at their uncle's house. Joseph of Arimathea would either have already preceded them to the city for the feast, or be expecting them there, and guided them for the remaining 8 miles of their journey. He would welcome Jesus and take charge of him, and take him to Zacharias' residence to join John. The full period of the feast lasted 7 days, but many only stayed for the 3 or 4 main days, and Joseph and Mary apparently set out on the 5th day for their return home. They probably planned to stay a couple of nights at their uncle's house at Arimathea, now Ramallah. This would give time for all members of their party to gather. Some of them maybe wanted to stay for more than 4 days at the feast. Jesus, in the safe keeping of Joseph, their uncle, would, they thought, join them there later before resuming their journey. Either Joseph of Arimathea or his servants would bring him along. So they may have planned. They then arrive towards evening, quietly spent the night at Joseph's house. The next day is spent resting and in expectation that Jesus would arrive, but no sign of him. Then they get anxious, visit the homes of acquaintances in the village in search of him. They inquire about recent arrivals in their party. Another night's passed. Then they retrace their steps. It's now the last day of the feast, and Jesus, as we're told in the King James Version of the Bible, is attending one of the lectures which the rabbis always gave during the days of the feast. This would appear to be the simple explanation to the whole story. More in a minute on A View from Space on AM 640.
You're listening to A View from Space with the Spaceman, exercising the rights to free speech while he still can, on AM 640.
Spaceman AM 640 and A View from Space. Like to email me, got a comment, got some information, or a question, just email spaceman at 640toronto.com or simply space at 640toronto.com. Now, I would like to give you a little bit of a background on this connection with Joseph of Arimathea and the ties to the royal British family. A little clarification of the genealogy. What I'm speaking of here is the claim of the British monarchy to be members of the House of David. The claim of connection comes from King David. The messianic bloodline comes from Judah, Phares, David, and Mathat. Mathat was the son of Levi. Levi was the son of Melchi. Melchi, the son of Janai. Janai was the son of Joseph. Joseph was descendant of Bel, the Great of England in 100 BC, who is the descendant of the Tudor line of kings, thereby connecting the royal family now living in Buckingham Palace, who are also direct descendants of the Tudor line of kings, thanks to Princess Diana's lineage. The Tudor claim to the throne, though, was a very illegitimate one for, well, a couple of reasons. First, this family tree came from the ancestral line of a woman, and secondly, it was from an illegitimate line. But tradition now has it that Arthur was a relative of Joseph of Arimathea, and that the knights of Arthur's Round Table were also all Joseph's relatives. There's been no verification for the knights being related to Joseph's relatives, but we've been provided with plenty of evidence linking Arthur to Glastonbury and Joseph. There's a sign at Glastonbury that states, site of King Arthur's tomb. There's a little sign there, a little square sign on a stick, and it says site of King Arthur's tomb. In the year 1191, the bodies of King Arthur and his queen were said to have been found on the south side of the Lady Chapel on the 19th of April, 1278. Their remains were then removed in the presence of King Edward I and Queen Eleanor to a black marble tomb on this site. This tomb survived until the dissolution of the abbey in 1539. This is the grave site in which two bodies and a cross with Arthur's name were unearthed at Glastonbury. If you research this subject yourself, as I know you do, you'll find that Druidism generally refers to three types of Druids. The Paleo-Druids were the originals back in the Iron Age. The Meso-Druids were the ones created in the 17th century and surviving until today, patterned after Masonic lodges. And finally, the Neo-Druids of the modern world. These so-called Druidic revivals that's going on that supposedly began in the 18th century. Meso-Druidism is the belief that unwritten knowledge of Druid lore was preserved in Western European culture as late as the 17th century. But now, some Meso-Druids claim a lineage back to 1245. Then supposedly a group of underground Druids and bards met somewhere in the British Isles and agreed to found something called the Mount Haemus Grove, which there supposedly is a Mount Haemus Grove in existence today. There's no proof of their existence going back beyond the late 1980s, though. But this claim of a continued lineage from at least the Middle Ages is one which is encountered many times when you research the topic of Meso-Druidism. In fact, the movement's twin origins are in the mystical fraternal societies of the 17th and 18th centuries, like the Freemasons and the Rosicrucians, as well as the philosophy of deism, and in the new, not quite yet a science of archaeology. In 1659, John Aubrey theorized that Stonehenge may have been a Druidic temple, but he never wanted to publicly declare his beliefs in a book publication. And it took William Stuckley in 1717 to publish the same theory. It was no coincidence. The order of bards, ovates, and druids also claimed to have been founded in 1717, the same time that William Stuckley published the same theory. What's more, the original charter of the Freemasons also dates to this very year, 1717. And as I told you earlier when I opened the show, Mubarak does a 17-minute speech in which he says he's not resigning but is handing over power. It was on the 17th day of the crisis in Egypt. Now you can see where the 1717 comes from, as Osiris, the sun god of ancient Egypt, was killed on the 17th day of the third month of Athir. So you can see the original charter of the Freemasons dates to this year also. Meso-Druids were even active in the world at around 1790. A Meso-Druidic society, simply called the Druidic Society, was established in Newburgh, New York, for instance, and so many other Druidic revival groups were quickly formed and claimed a continuance from the original Druids of the classic Celts. In some researchers' findings, they state that this is actually false. Unlike, say, the Romans, the Celts were either converted peaceably, while those who retained a pagan belief eventually died out, and that these Druids were not influenced by Celtic mythology and history at all, but were influenced by mystical Christianity, ritual magic, and fraternal organizations of the era. So as you can see, as you can easily tell, there are many discrepancies between what is now generally accepted about the beliefs of the Paleo-Druids, the Meso-Druids, and the Neo-Druids. There are similarities among all three. Here's what they each have in common with one another: that Druids had built dolmens, cromlechs, and stone temples, especially Stonehenge, and that they used stone altars. These structures predate the Druids by at least 1,500 years. That Druids worshipped the sun. That Druids were descended of the Levites, or were akin to the biblical patriarchs, right down to being monotheists. That Druids were strictly male. That Druids were freedom fighters also against Rome, although this was supposedly mainly a French idea. And that Druids practiced a ritual magic, alchemy. That is, they were like medieval magicians. Meso-Druidism's influence was set firmly in place by the forgeries of Lolo Morganovic and his book Bardas, which claims to be the teachings of the medieval bards and druids, included our claims as the druids were not only monotheists but Christians, as well as a cosmology which would have been foreign to the Paleo-Druids. There are two opposing forces in the universe. There's God, the energy tending towards life, and Scythra, energy tending towards destruction, emanating out of Anwen, or the abyss. Now, God spoke his name, and Manred, matter formed into three planes of existence, we're told. Abrid, the innermost circle where life and Sithral battle. And this is apparently the plane that we're on. Gwynfid, purity, where life exists free from evil. And the third is called Sugan, infinity, where God alone exists. So we're on the plane, the lowest plane, where the battle exists. Gwynfid, meaning to purify, where life exists free from evil, is the next level. And then, of course, the infinity level where God alone exists. Most of what I've just mentioned can be found in many of the older Druid orders still in existence, like the Order of the Bards, the Ovates and Druids, the Druidic Order. Robin Gibb of the Bee Gees, his second wife, Dwina Murphy Gibb, is a Druid and is a follower of the Brahma Kumaris. Ex-UK Prime Minister Tony Blair and his wife, Sherry, are good friends with the Gibbs. Spent a lot of time, too, hanging out with each other, Dwina and Robin, at their Miami mansion, even when he was Prime Minister, Tony Blair. Now, I ask you, if they spent a lot of time with one another, it would follow then that they would share the same views and maybe even the same religion, wouldn't you think? I mean, you only befriend people who are like-minded. Isn't that correct? The former Prime Minister of Britain, Tony Blair, is certainly a Freemason. After all, the titular head of all Freemasonry is Queen Elizabeth II. British protocol has it that once the new Prime Minister of Britain is elected, he must then visit the Queen to ask to form a new government. That fact tells you all you need to know. Spaceman back with more on A View from Space on AM 640 Talk Radio. Back in a moment.
You're listening to A View from Space with the Spaceman, exercising the right to free speech while he still can on AM 640.
I'm the guy that calls space. Like to email me, it's simple, spaceman at 640toronto.com for one address. The other address is space at 640toronto.com. Now, the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man are foundational teachings of Freemasonry. Those two phrases are even often carved in the stonework of Masonic temples. A glimpse of the Masonic concept of God is provided by examining those phrases. Monotheism is the sole dogma of Freemasonry. Belief in one God is required of every initiate. But this conception of the Supreme Being is left to a person's own, the initiate's, in this case, interpretation. So it doesn't matter what God it is that you have as long as it's one God, because Freemasonry is not concerned with theological distinctions. This is the basis of their universality. Masonic people, Masonry's idea is of oneness only. The true Mason is not creed-bound. He realizes with the divine illumination of his lodge that as a Mason, his religion must be universal. Christ, Buddha, Muhammad, the name doesn't mean much because he recognizes only the light and not the bearer. He worships at every shrine, bows before every altar, whether in temple, mosque, cathedral, realizing with his truer understanding the oneness of all spiritual truth. To the altar of Freemasonry, all men are instructed to bring their vows, wishes, desires, and offerings. Around it, all men, whether they have received their teachings from Zoroaster, Moses, Muhammad, Confucius, or the founder of the Christian religion, just so long as they believe in the universality of the brotherhood of God and universality of the brotherhood of man, meet on a common level. The Jew returns to his synagogue, the Islamic to his mosque, the Christian to his church, each better prepared for the solemn duties of life by the association in this universal brotherhood. The Illuminati believe that a brotherhood of man can be established upon the fatherhood of God, which could and should be a universal unifying synthesis of sufficient power to draw all men together. Masonry proclaims the universal sovereignty of the All-Father because the Illuminati believe that who has sent every divine messenger into the world of humanity to teach men the way, the truth, and the light. The ancient teachings were projected on the earth plane by the great teachers, avatars, divine messengers, messiahs, who, at the behest of the great architect, God, came into flesh from the celestial knowledge of the lodge at different times and to different races of men. Jesus of Nazareth, for instance, was sent to be a light to the world to some branches of the human race, but other branches have had and do now have their Buddha, their Krishna, their Zoroaster, their Confucius, their Muhammad. Masonry declares that all these peoples, of whatever religion or creed, are children of God, born into a particular race, religion, or creed to get out whatever benefits and self-development they need, or are capable of, on their long journey back to the celestial lodge. As all men live and move and have their being in the Creator, all men are potential brothers. So, Masonry emphasizes no one avatar in its ritual more than the other. An avatar, by the way, is a manifestation of God, or was up until the cyber world got a hold of it. And now man is God because an avatar is now some icon that represents you in cyberspace. So now, instead of being a manifestation of God as the original word meant, it now means that man is God, and it's a representation of a man on a computer in cyberspace. Masonic fraternal Druidism is a religious and philosophical system that has lasted for at least 2 centuries, supposedly helping thousands of people to gain a better understanding of themselves and their times. Its attitude of reverent skepticism is fully in keeping with the ideals of the founders of the Reformed and neo-pagan Druid movements. The Illuminati believe that these Meso-pagans have a great deal of wisdom and experience that we should recognize, and many of the fraternal Druids today are right on the borderline between Meso and Neo-paganism. In London, throughout the century, Druid groups appeared along with Rosicrucian, Freemason organizations as the Druidic Order put in their introductory booklet, The Ancient Druidic Order. They wrote, the 17th century saw the emergence of the order into its more modern shape. In the 17th and 18th centuries, there was a complex of mystical societies. Hermetics, Rosicrucians, Freemasons, and Druids who often had members in common. So it was all mixed in together. In 1781, Henry Hurrell set up the Ancient Order of Druids, and sometimes just called the Druid Order, as were a few others, leading to no end of historical confusion as a secret society based on Masonic patterns. Not surprising, since Hurrell was a carpenter and a house builder, meaning he was also a Mason. This group, like most of the similar mystical societies formed at the time, was heavily influenced by Jacob Boehme. He was a Protestant mystic, heavily involved with alchemy, Hermeticism, and the Kabbalah, as well as being a student of the famous Dietrich Eckhart. I spoke about him earlier as being Hitler's handler from the Tula Society. His mystical writings attempted to reconcile all these influences and had a tremendous impact on later generation of mystical Christians, Rosicrucians, Freemasons, and Theosophists. All are Gnostic religions, meaning you learn a little bit, you're revealed some knowledge, you go to a high level. To go to a higher level, you again have to learn more. So it's what you know, how high you go. And of course, you rise a few levels and they tell you what you've learned is the truth is not really the truth. We're merely protecting the actual real truth from giving it to just anyone. So unless you reach a certain level, you're lied to. Until finally, at the very peak, at the very top of Masonry, they will reveal to you that the God they worship is Lucifer. Overseas, the link between deism, Masonry, and Druidism was once again established in the small town of Newburgh, New York. George Adolph Koch has an entire chapter on the Society of Druids in his book, Religion of the American Enlightenment. Deism and downright atheism were popular during the 1780s and 90s among the American intelligentsia, especially those who supported the American and French revolutions. In fact, a large number of the key political figures involved in both revolutions, American and French, were deistic Masons and Rosicrucians. Check your history. You'll find him correct. Koch tells the story of the Newburgh Druids this way. Some influential citizens of Newburgh, New York, had organized themselves into an interesting radical religious body called the Druid Society, like his sister organization, the Deistic Society in New York. It was a radical offshoot of an earlier and more conservative society. A Masonic lodge had been established in Nuremberg in 1788, and it seems, as you attempt to piece together the fragmentary facts, that as the brothers, or at least a number of them, became more and more radical in the feverish days of the French Revolution, the metamorphosis from Mason to Druid was the result. The Druids held their meetings in the room formerly occupied by the Masons and continued to use a ceremony similar to the Masonic. It's interesting, too, that as the Druid Society died out, with the end of the famous deist of the time, Palmer's activities in New York City, a new Masonic lodge was instituted in Nuremberg in 1806. So you can see the slow infiltration and the slow takeover of Christianity in those early days, and Druidism sneaking in, mixing it all together. And once the Bible was rewritten, who knows what went in. It's a view from space on AM 640. Back with more in a moment on Talk Radio.
He goes deeper into today's headlines than anyone else dares to go. But you can take it. This is A View from Space with the Spaceman on AM 640.
Spaceman AM 640 and A View from Space. I have a couple of email addresses if you'd like to drop a line. It's spaceman at 640toronto.com or simply space at 640toronto.com. So, you got to ask the question as to why those breakaway Freemasons chose the name of Druids. It all seems that when they abandoned Christianity, with which Masonry in America was incompatible, they went to the religion as they conceived it, of the ancient Druids, who were originally sun worshippers. It was commonly believed at that time by the radicals, of course, that both Christianity and Freemasonry were taken from the worship of the sun. So the Druids merely went back to the pure worship of the great luminary, the visible agent of a great invisible first cause, and saw Christianity as a subversion of the true faith, a superstition. And this is how they're going to sell it in the very near future. It was, in short, developed by a designing and unscrupulous priesthood, to put it mildly in the language of the day. It appears that Thomas Paine, one of the fathers of Confederation in America, among other radicals of the time, was convinced that Masonry was descended from Druidism. Koch even refers to an essay by Paine, The Origin of Freemasonry, written in New York City in 1805. In this essay, he mentions a society of Masons in Dublin who called themselves Druids. Spectacular fantasies and conjectures that have been offered over the centuries to explain the origins of Masonry and Rosicrucianism. We'll have to wait another article to be properly discussed, but you can say this for now, that the sorts of Druidism with which the noble Thomas Paine and his friends might have been familiar were far more likely to have been offshoots of Freemasonry than the other way around. As for the group of Druid Masons in Dublin, there's not much else I know about them, but I do speculate that they may very well have been intimately linked with Irish revolutionary politics, which may or may not have strained their relations with Druid Masons in England. There doesn't seem to be much information about Irish Masonic Druidism available, but there is a little bit about the developments in Wales. Following the tremendously successful Eisteddfod, the Bardic Gathering, organized by Thomas Jones in Cornwall in 1789, a huge variety of Welsh cultural and literary societies mushroomed and flourished. In 1792, a member of several of these groups in London named Edward Williams, using the pen name of Lolo Morganwig, Lolo of Geomorgan, held an autumn equinox ceremony on top of the hill in London called Primrose Hill. Along with some other Welsh bards, he set up a small circle of pebbles and an altar in which he called the Mian Gorset. There was a naked sword on this altar, and part of the ritual involved the sheathing of this sword. At the time, no one paid very much attention to the ceremony or its obvious sexual symbolism, which, if you notice, might legitimately have been called pagan, at least not outside of the London bardic community. Iolo, however, was not daunted. He declared that this Geomorganshire bard had an unbroken line of bardic druidic tradition going back to the ancient druids, and that his ceremony was part of it. He then proceeded, almost all scholars agree or researched on this, to translate, mistranslate, and occasionally even forge various documents and ancient manuscripts in order to prove this and his later claims. Many people feel that he confused and misconstrued genuine Welsh history for over 100 years. You talk about manipulating history. In 1819, Iolo managed to get his stone circle and its ceremony, now called as a whole the Gorset, inserted into the genuine Eisteddfod in Carmarthen, Wales, near where King Arthur was supposedly born. It was a tremendous success with the bards, of course, and the tourists, and it's been part of the Eisteddfod tradition ever since, with greater and greater celebrations every year. It's been going on since the 1800s. The effect of Iolo's work didn't stop there, because later writers like Lewis Spence, Robert Graves, and Gerald Gardner apparently took Iolo's historical facts at face value and proceeded to put these theories out there that have launched dozens of occult and mystical organizations, most of them having little of anything to do with authentic paleo-pagan druidism at all. In 1796, all megalithic monuments in Northern Europe were firmly defined as druidic, especially if they were in the form of circles or lines of standing stones. And that year, yet another element was added. In Latour d'Auvergne's book called The Origins Gallois, he thought he had discovered a word in the Breton language for megalithic tombs, dolmen, and by both his spelling and that of dolmen, the word became part of the archaeological jargon in the growing Druid folklore. At this point, the folklore also called Celtomania, and went something like this. The Celts are the oldest people in the world. Their language is preserved practically intact. In Bas Breton, they were profound philosophers who inspired doctrines that have been handed down by the Welsh bardic schools. Dolmens are their altars, where their priests, the Druids, offered human sacrifice. Stone alignments were their astronomical observations. This is exactly what Stonehenge was and is. Art, music, drama, and poetry were used for these Druids as characters and sources of inspiration. A few eccentrics, many of them devout, if unorthodox, Christians, claimed to be Druids and made big headlines. Wealthy people built miniature Stonehenges in their gardens even, and hired fake druids to scare their guests. Mystically orientated individuals drifted from Masonic group to guests. Mystically performing the rituals. And Masonic groups, as well as Rosicrucian lodges, Druid groves. Hardly anyone then or now could tell the difference. Ecumenicalism was the order of the day. And in 1878 at the Eisteddfod, the Archdruid presiding over the Gorsedd ceremony inserted a prayer to Mother Kali of India. This might have been magically quite sensible, and it was certainly in keeping with traditional pagan attitudes, except for the fact that the British attitude towards Indian culture and religion wasn't very compatible at the time. But before this, in 1833, the secret society founded by Hurrell split up over the question of whether it should be mainly a benefit society or a mystical one. The majority voted for being a charitable society and changed the name of the United Ancient Order of Druids. This group, with branches all over the world, still exists as a charitable and fraternal organization, rather like the Shriners. Meanwhile, the minority group, still apparently calling itself by the old name, the Ancient Order of Druids, also continued to exist as a mystical Masonic sort of organization. As of October of last year, the British Charity Commission has accepted that Druids' worship of natural spirits is an actual religious activity. The British Charity Commission says the network's work in promoting Druidry as a religion is in the public interest. This was just last year, last October, that the British Charity Commission deemed Druidism as a religious activity. The end of the news article from the BBC states that the move comes thousands of years after the first Druids worshipped in Britain. So it, as the BBC states, took over 1,000 years to legalize Druidism. And now it's going to catch fire and infiltrate Christianity big time, giving birth to the new Luciferian religion on its way. Space back with more in a moment on A View from Space on AM 640.
You're listening to A View from Space with the Spaceman, exercising the right to free speech while he still can, on AM 640.
I'm the guy that calls space. This is A View from Space on AM 640, a final segment for this evening. The Illuminati are claiming that the age of innocence is over. The witches of old must walk the earth again to battle the enemy or die trying. So goddess worship, the feminine, is coming back, and coming back in a big way. Mary Magdalene is really who they have their sights set on. From New Age notions of a Mother Earth goddess figure to the goddess of witchcraft, the basis of Satan's future church is firmly rooted in this present age. Add to that the heavily propagated figure of whom I just mentioned, MM, and I'm not talking about Marilyn Monroe. Mary Magdalene clearly is being used to deceive the entire world into thinking the Antichrist lineage is Christ's lineage, and the foundation for a great end-time apostasy is already being set in motion. Mary Magdalene is the mistress of the Grail. Here's a few lines from a poem taken from The Crystal Rim by Hafiz. The earth lifts its glass to the sun, and light is poured. A bird comes and sits on a crystal rim, and from my forest cove I hear singing. An emerald bird rises from inside me and now sits upon the beloved's glass. I have left that dark cave forever. My body has blended with his. I lay my wing as a bridge to you so that you can join us singing. They liken it to pearls from an ancient lover's gift, Magdalene. Sights and legends lie strung across a vast expanse reaching from Ethiopia, Palestine, Egypt, France, north of the highlands and islands of Scotland, crumbling chapel ruins, great Gothic cathedrals, caves, symbols carved in stone, and stories of her comings and goings are like fragments of an old story necklace waiting and waiting to be found. Mary Magdalene is right now being seen rising out of a long imposed sleep, like the story of Sleeping Beauty. You never heard about Mary Magdalene at all, but now the Da Vinci Code, Dan Brown books, the Illuminati believe she and her people have been drugged into unconsciousness for 2,000 years by an extraordinary effort to suppress the other half of this story of Mary Magdalene's. From the moment that St. Peter's Church formed the rock and the foundation of Christianity, she was written out of accepted doctrine. So, the split between the British monarchy and the Vatican Church comes about. Mary Magdalene is the center of that fight. The Illuminati says that she's been written out, save for a few references to her as a sinner, a woman from whom 7 devils were removed by Jesus, and the one who dried the sweat on his body with her long hair. Peter's religious authority stemmed from the church's acceptance that he was the first disciple to see Jesus after the crucifixion. Yet 3 of the Gospels claim that Mary Magdalene was the first to see him in the garden. The sacred Grail pattern that requires presence of the feminine was severed at the core during the founding of the church. Yet again, the Illuminati believe the pieces are revealing themselves to anyone who chooses to, what they call, awaken. Did you know that there's a wall carving of Adam and Eve representing Jesus and Mary Magdalene in the garden at Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland? We're experiencing, through the printed media and motion pictures, the reemergence of Mary Magdalene. This is taken from a book called The Secret Life of Bees by Sue Monk Kidd. Mary is rising. She is rising to her heights. Our Mary will not be cast down and bound up, and neither will her daughters. We will rise, daughters. We will rise. We're talking about goddess worship coming back. The green movement, as I've remarked before here on A View from Space on AM 640 Talk Radio, the green movement is in fact goddess worship. The goddess in the green movement is Gaia, spelled G-A-I-A. Supposedly, the earth is a feminine spirit who needs to be nurtured, is a living and breathing spirit and must be protected. Hence all the changes that are coming in your life with the green movement. Bicycles, solar energy. No more plastic. Protect trees. Don't use paper. One of the many recent dramatic appearances from Mary Magdalene is Jesus, Mary, and Da Vinci, the ABC primetime news show that had people buzzing a while ago. The show that first aired looked at the question of the supposedly true relationship between Mary Magdalene and Jesus Christ as companions and possible lovers. The film actually acknowledged her status as the apostle of the apostles, not the repentant prostitute that had been her image for almost 2,000 years or a little over. Also presented was the symbolism in the Last Supper painting by Leonardo da Vinci and his portrayal of Mary Magdalene, sitting at the right side of Christ, and their bodies interestingly positioned, forming a V, a feminine symbol, and a chalice. There are a couple of quotes from the ABC Network show. Here's one. There's no factual basis for that long-standing tradition that Mary Magdalene was a prostitute, a woman of ill repute. Mary Magdalene is one of the greatest saints in the history of the Church. That was spoken by Reverend Richard McBrien, Ph.D. of Notre Dame University, on the ABC broadcast. Mary Magdalene's designation as a prostitute was officially reversed by the Catholic Church, if you weren't aware, in 1969. That's right. Mary Magdalene was corrected as not being a prostitute by the Roman Catholic Church itself in 1969. By the way, here's another quote, this time by Karen King, Harvard University professor. I think it's entirely plausible to think that Jesus may have been married. It was a normal practice for Jewish men. It also would be normal not to mention that he had a wife. It would follow then that if many people that watched began to realize that if Jesus and Mary Magdalene really did have children, she herself might actually be carrying the same bloodline. That's a very different legacy than thinking we are less than or even worse sinners. In the August 11th, 2003 edition of Time magazine, a Time Warner company, the largest media company in the world, by the way, stated, from the beginning, her view has been ignored, meaning Mary Magdalene's, unappreciated, yet she remains. She cannot be silenced. Included in that feature article on Mary Magdalene in the August 11th, 2003 issue of Time magazine, and the popular novel The Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown, both indicated her potent matrix is weaving its way back into our psyches through movies, literature, revealed documents, and a growing interest in her story, driven by the Illuminati-controlled media. Mary Magdalene is being raised from the hidden caves of man's unconscious. She's re-emerging out of 2,000 years of denial, out of banishment because of what the elites call mistaken identity. And the world is about to realize the fulfillment of a sacred trust, the blueprint for love and sacred union between Jesus Christ, the Savior of the world, according to Christianity, and Mary Magdalene, who wed, had sex, and had children. That bloodline gave birth to the Merovingian bloodline. And the one who's coming, the Antichrist, will claim that lineage. The great deception's already underway. Don't get caught. This has been A View from Space on AM 640 Talk Radio. Coast to Coast is next. I'm Space, and I'm out.